Hi, everyone. We'll just go ahead and wait a few minutes for other attendees to join. Thank you all for your time. We'll just take about maybe 30 seconds to a minute here. Hi, folks. Welcome to today's webinar on HTTP Sandbox Workshop. We're going to get started now. So my name is Rafael Cos, and I am part of the community team, community team here at Hortonworks. I'm a data evangelist. I've been working in the Hadoop and big data space for the last about 6 years. I'm one of the authors of Hadoop for Dummies. You can find my Twitter here, and here's also my email. So today's agenda, we're going to go through a few things. First and foremost, we're going to go through what's Hadoop, and very briefly kind of give an introduction for the folks who may not be familiar, or when we look at HTTP, the Hortonworks data platform, or what is HTTP versus Hadoop. Then we'll talk a little bit about the sandbox, right? So what is the sandbox? How does it work? What do you get with it? How do you get started? And then we're going to sort of transition into a sandbox demo. So when we do the sandbox demo, we'll actually be kind of interacting with the sandbox and kind of going through some of the initial steps in the initial tutorial. And then at the end, we'll kind of go through a couple of next steps. So, what do you do after, once you have the Sandbox up and running, you have the, tutorials up and running, maybe you've done a couple of the key ones, what do you do next? And then we'll the goal is to really kind of try to go through this in about 45 minutes or so, and then kind of leave 10 to 15 minutes at the end for questions and answers. So with that, let's get started with what is Hadoop. So before we go into what is Hadoop, a little bit about Hortonworks. So Hortonworks has been around for about 5 years. We started with 24 architects from the original developers of Hadoop at Yahoo. Nowadays, we have over 1,000 employees. We're a publicly traded company, and we actually support a couple different customers. One of the interesting things about Hortonworks is we are a leader in the open source community. So our products and our technology, we are focused on 100% open source. So from the Hadoop environment, Spark, NiFi, and even to the tutorials, they're all open source. So with that, let's talk a little bit more about the big data space and where the HTTP Sandbox sort of plays in. So as we look at modern data architectures, and we're trying to consume additional data sources. Sometimes they're new data sources. Sometimes they're data sources that they've been around that we haven't sort of taken advantage of. And what we want to do is bring them into our data lake, right? And Hadoop is this key technology that's coexisting with existing other data repositories, whether it's your EDW or other NoSQL server repositories. So that's data that's at rest. And you can do that both on-prem or in the cloud, right? And then as you look at any data lake, you really need streams of data, or you need to have a nice flow of data into the data lake in order to grow that data lake. So there's some additional technology around in motion, whether it's data flow or stream processing, to complement the data at rest and feed data into your larger data lake. So as we look at this, really this Hadoop environment, this is where the Hortonworks data platform fits in. And you can play with that Hadoop environment, work with that Hadoop environment, whether it's on-prem or cloud. And we have some other technology called Hortonworks Data Flow, which I believe there's a webinar tomorrow, which you can learn more about how to stream data and get data into your data lake. So with that, let's actually get into the Hortonworks Data Platform. So as you look at Hortonworks Data Platform, Hadoop is one of the key technologies that's supported in this environment. You can really think of the technologies here in 5 major groups, right? You have a data management layer where you have your Hadoop distributed file system and your resource manager with Yarn. You have a collection of data access engines. So one of the interesting things about Hadoop and the Hadoop ecosystem HTTP is that not only can you work with sort of a MapReduce API, but we can work with a whole collection of APIs and environments from Pig and SQL to Spark and Solar and Storm. So for all these various data access engines, you have a series of tools to provide enterprise operations, security, and governance. One of the main tools that we're looking with in the operations side is Apache Ambari. So Apache Ambari is our operations dashboard, is our main user interface into working with Hadoop and many of its technologies. And for governance and security, there's a whole collection of other tools that you work with. And you can work with Hadoop both HTTP on-prem or in the cloud. So as we look at HTTP and Hadoop, so how does that kind of relate? So Apache Hadoop is one of the key technologies that's inside of HTTP. It's been a technology this year. We're celebrating Hadoop's 10th anniversary, so it's been around for 10 years. Initially started with inspiration from papers from Google, so the Google file system and Google MapReduce. Yahoo then took that and started developing what's now called Hadoop, and at some point decided to open source it in 2008. Hortonworks came into existence as a company in 2011, right? And the first release of the Hortonworks data platform was Hortonworks HTTP 1.0 in 2012. Hadoop continues to evolve. Apache Hadoop 2, which originally came with the introduction of Yarn, happened in 2013, and there's been a consistent heartbeat of additional releases and enhancements in Hadoop. So nowadays we're at Hadoop 2.7.3, and that's the level of Hadoop that's supported in HTTP 2.5. And there's a lot of talk in the community about Hadoop 3. There's some blogs that will be coming on our website to talk more about what we're doing and what the community is doing around Apache Hadoop 3. So Hadoop continues to be an evolving and growing technology. And it's one of the key components within Apache Hadoop. So Apache Hadoop actually consists of 4 technologies. It's a HDFS, which is a file system, YAR, which is a resource manager, MapReduce, which is a framework to do distributed computing on data, and Hadoop Core, which is a collection of utilities. So this technology is what makes up Apache Hadoop, and then there's a whole ecosystem of data access engines and enterprise capability for operations, security, and governance that's sort of wrapped around it as an extended Hadoop ecosystem. So as we look at the extended Hadoop ecosystem, this is sort of what the rest of what you'll find in HTTP and what you'll find in the Sandbox. So this is the 2.5 release. So in there, you'll find both, and you'll see some of these things if you maybe seen this before, where we're actually supporting multiple releases of some of the technology. So for example, for Spark, we support both Spark 1.6.2 and a tech preview of 2.0. In a similar fashion for Hive, we support both, the stable release of 1.2.1 and sort of, have a tech preview for 2.1 that includes a lot of new and improved performance for your SQL interface. And today, we won't, sometimes you kind of look at this chart and it might seem sort of overwhelming. One of the things is you probably want to pick a couple of key technologies to start with. So today we'll be really interacting with Apache Ambari, which is our operational environment, and some of the views in Ambari. And we'll be interacting with HDFS to kind of bring data into Hadoop, and we'll actually issue a couple of SQL queries with Apache Hive. So that's a very short and quick sort of introduction into HTTP and Hadoop. If we have a much deeper, a longer introduction, it's about 45 minutes just on what the technology is. So there's a collection of crash courses from the Hadoop Summit. The replays are available, they're free, and there's actually, so you go to the Hadoop Summit website for San Jose on the agenda page. On the right, you'll see these crash courses. The videos and the slides are available, and you'll find crash courses for Apache Hadoop, Apache Spark, Apache NiFi, IoT streaming, and data science. So this is probably about 5 hours worth of free content to get you started on this, and that corresponds to the whole list of hands-on, right? So the idea with the crash courses is short introduction into the technology, then kind of get you into a hands-on with it. So with that, let's actually look at what is HTTP Sandbox. So what's inside HTTP Sandbox? So the HTTP Sandbox is a single node image, right? So when you deal with Hadoop, it seems like there's a question. Seems like there's a refresh issue with the webinar, so let's give Brian Talk a second and see if the slides come back. Hi, folks. The meeting is not over. It seems like we're having some technical issues with something that's preventing us from sharing the slides. We're troubleshooting, and give us a second, and hopefully we'll be back in a second. Okay, folks. So it seems like the slide should be back. I'm just going to give it a second for make sure that everyone can see the slides again. Okay. So let's continue. So I think there's a chat, and if you're someone can post to make sure that they can see the slides again. Yeah, we got a confirmation. Great. So, so we're talking about what is the HTTP Sandbox. So, Hadoop works in a clustered environment, and so oftentimes getting started, just having access to a cluster to get started could be an impedance to that. So, what the Sandbox provides is a single node environment that runs in a pseudo-distributed fashion on on an individual machine. One of the nice things about the Sandbox is that it pre-installs a preconfigured HTTP for this sort of single node environment. And we also sort of start a series of services automatically on boot, so that when you bring up the Sandbox, a collection of services are pre-started. Not all the services are started, but many of the key ones are started. And when you're looking at getting started with Hadoop, you really need two things. First, you need an environment, and that's what the Sandbox tries to do. It gives you an easy way to have an environment quickly. And once you have an environment, what do you do with it? So really, the guide to once you have the environment, what do you do with it, start exploring that is the tutorials. So we have a collection of tutorials that you can explore with the Sandbox. So we'll be exploring them soon. And we just released an HTTP 2.5 Sandbox. So there's a couple of blogs that were published that tell you a little bit more about what's new in the 2.5 Sandbox. So please check it out. If you're following along, hopefully you're opening up a browser and exploring some of these URLs as we're kind of going through the webinar. So as we look at the Sandbox, so the Sandbox comes in a couple of flavors. There's a virtual machine, Docker, and Azure environment for the Sandbox. The virtual machines that are supported are VirtualBox and VMware. And like we said, the Sandbox tries to do a couple of things. Tries to make it easy to kind of get you started, and provides a series. Makes it easy to engage with some of the key user interfaces that people sort of interact with. So one of them is around operations. So Apache Ambari is a project to help you sort of interact with Hadoop and the extended Hadoop ecosystem. And actually, Ambari is now actually even growing beyond that and interacting with things like Apache NiFi. So Ambari is sort of classically can be thought of as providing your operational dashboard. And recently, Ambari has been extended to also provide some dev and DevOps tooling. So this allows you to do things like add files, issue commands, whether it's SQL or Pig, or interact with other services with a nicer UI. And the other sort of key technology or interface that we'll be sort of dealing with is Apache Zeppelin. So Apache Zeppelin provides a web notebook experience to do interactive analytics. So that could be Hive, that could be Spark. Zeppelin has a rich ecosystem of interpreters that can work with different projects and technologies. So, and like I mentioned, there's over 60 plus free tutorials that you can explore. So when you launch the Sandbox, one of the things that you first see is this splash screen, and we'll kind of go into details of how you interact with the splash screen. So before we kind of dive into some kind of a demo, I do want to review a couple of things. One is if you're working with a Sandbox on a virtual machine, you want to make sure you have enough hardware, right? So you need more than 8 gigs of RAM. So if you have 8 gigs of RAM, that's not enough, right? You need to have more than 8 gigs of RAM because you need to allocate 8 gigs of RAM to the virtual machine. If you don't have that, don't worry, you can still interact and leverage the tutorials, but you probably need to look into either one of the different cloud options to kind of provide you an environment to get started. And we'll actually cover some of the cloud options a little further down. The other thing I want to make people aware of is make sure you successfully download the Sandbox. So the Sandbox, depending on what flavor of the Sandbox you're working with, could be about 12 gigabytes. So if you're dealing with VirtualBox, it's actually 11.75 gigabytes. But on the Sandbox download page, there's a whole collection of MD5 hashes, which you can use to compare to see if you've successfully downloaded the entire Sandbox successfully. So if you've never used MD5, it's fairly simple. If you're on a Mac, it's natively on the Mac. And you can basically run a command MD5 and the file name, and then it'll give you a hash back. And you want to compare that hash with the one listed on the download page and make sure that you have the full set of bits. And lastly, so the Sandbox is really working with a virtual machine environment. And some folks might not be so familiar with working with virtual machines, or maybe fairly new to Hadoop and not familiar with some of the different services and ports and IPs that are used. So what we've done is there's a Learning the Ropes of the Hortonworks Sandbox tutorial. And what that tries to do is give you some additional tips beyond what's in the install guide, beyond what's on the release notes, about how to work with the Sandbox, right? So you'll find tips about working with the Sandbox on a virtual machine, in the cloud, and actually, if you're exploring the Docker version of the Sandbox, we have some additional tips in there also. So how do you get started? So what you do is, if you download the virtual machine, you'll download an image. Once you finish downloading it, you'll import that image. When you import that image into your virtual machine environment, it takes about 4 minutes. Now this depends on the hardware you're dealing with. So, more or less about 4 minutes. So give it about 4 minutes. And then what you really want to do is get to the splash screen. So when you're done, the splash screen doesn't come up automatically. What you'll do is you'll see a message very similar to this. And there's two key things to note. One is the IP. So this is, if you're using VirtualBox, this is probably the IP that will come up for you. But depending on the environment you're dealing with, you might see a different collection of IPs. So definitely take note of this IP, write it down. This will be your sort of host root IP that you'll use for as you kind of go through the different tutorials. And then what you want to do is, if you take the full URL, the 127.0.0.1 : with the port 8888, this is going to take you to the splash screen. Right? So the splash screen is your sort of the welcome page to kind of help you, guide you through the rest of this journey. So when the splash screen comes up, you'll see, and so you'll have your local host, depending on what it is from the previous screen, right? And you've noted that, and you go to port 888, you'll see this splash screen. And you'll see this has two sides. One is new to Hadoop. So new Hadoop is going to launch Bari, and it's also going to open up the Getting Started tutorial, which is sort of your Getting Started environment. The other thing on your right, you'll see Advanced HTTP. So the Advanced HTTP gives you some additional more users and services that you could explore. You can actually click on both of them. It's okay to sort of explore both of these. And we'll go a little bit more what's into advanced. The other thing that you'll see when you get to the splash screen is a get help, right? So any new technology sometimes can be daunting just because it's new, right? And we all go through different learning processes. Sometimes things work better. Sometimes things more challenging. So what we have is Get Help actually links you to the Hortonworks Community Connection, so which is our news group Q&A forum where you can post questions and get answers, and we'll actually go into a little bit more details about what that community environment looks like. But it's a great way to get help. So if you're stuck at any point in time, whether it's on the splash screen, you can click help, or on the tutorial, you can post a question, and the extended community looks at that to provide feedback as soon as possible. So when you click on the advanced button, you'll see a screen that doesn't exactly look like this, but you will see 6 boxes with these 6 services. So one of the things that's new in the HTTP 2.5 Sandbox is we have a collection of personas. So there's about 5 personas that we have and we interact with in the Sandbox. Most folks will be dealing with Maria. So Maria is our data developer. She's a data analyst with a SQL background, and she's one of the primary personas that you work with interacting and building some of these tutorials. So Maria actually deals with, her main interface are 2, is Bari views and Zeppelin. And in the demo, we'll bring it up and we'll actually log in with Maria there. There's also an Amy data scientist, and Amy really focuses more on Zeppelin, and she's exploring Spark and machine learning, and Zeppelin is really the key interface for her. For the operators, we have 2 personas. One is Raj. So Raj is a primary Hadoop operator. So if you're dealing with security with Apache Ranger, or maybe trying to build a data pipeline, Raj is the persona that has the appropriate permissions and setup to be able to carry out some of these tasks. Now, Sam is a persona, but you won't find any IDs for Sam, right? But Sam is really the owner of root, right? So if you need to do something with root, or if you need to do something with the Bari admin ID, Sam is a persona that owns that. And lastly, the persona is Apache, for Apache Atlas is a data steward. So Holger's our data steward. So the Holger is in charge of looking at who's doing what, when, why, right? And looking at reports and setting policies around this. And Holger's main tool to interact with is Apache Atlas, right? And the last sort of thing I want to point out on the splash screen is many times you want a command line interface. Sometimes you might need a command line interface to interact with Hadoop, or you prefer dealing with the command line. And just being able to connect and SSH into environment, if you're not so familiar with that environment, can be challenging. The Learning the Ropes tutorial kind of walks you through providing information and many tutorials on how to tell it in. But the Sandbox actually provides a built-in browser-based SSH client. So if you click on the SSH client, it'll bring up a command prompt within your browser. So it makes it really easy to connect from the command line. So once you have your environment, now it comes to what do you do, right? And that's where we have a whole collection of tutorials. The first tutorial that especially for the new folks and for folks who are getting started, is this tutorial that looks at the Apache Hadoop and some of the key technologies in the ecosystem, right? So this is that Hello HTTP tutorial. If you're starting to explore Spark, we have a tutorial and a whole tutorial series around Spark. And we have the tutorials also around Apache NiFi and a whole series of collection of tutorials around use cases. Over the next couple of weeks, since we have a new Sandbox, we have been revamping many of these tutorials. So we've been posting on the blog about the Sandbox and some of the tutorials, and you'll see more blogs coming soon. Just like the Sandbox itself, just like the HTTP, maybe all our technologies are open source. So just like the tutorials are also open source. So if you want to play with those tutorials and look at or provide us feedback, we have a whole Hortonworks contribution guide where you can give that. At the end of any of the tutorials, you'll find these two buttons, one to find an answer and ask questions, and you can find a series of tags that you can tag a question to make sure it's routed to the appropriate folks to get you the fastest response for a particular tutorial. So, this is where you can find the repos for the tutorials and our contribution guide. If you want to provide us additional feedback, or you find any issues, or want to provide some enhancements. So we've talked a little bit. We've talked some about the Sandbox in a virtual machine environment, and there's a whole thing about having more than 8 gigs around. So cloud is a fantastic way to get started with Hadoop, and many companies are looking at the cloud for their big data deployments because of no upfront sort of setup of the hardware. Maybe it provides additional IT flexibility. But the other thing that's wonderful for cloud is these ephemeral workloads. So if you have a spiking workload, if you have some bursts where you want to have additional resource, cloud is a fantastic thing for that. But in particular for getting started, if you don't have the hardware to run it, you can actually get started in the cloud. And the other thing about sort of the cloud environment, if you're starting with the Sandbox and now you're starting to work with it and you need additional hardware because you're starting to bring in more data and actually have a bigger workload, the Sandbox is really there to kind of help you get started. But it's, again, remember, it's a single node, pseudo-distributed environment. So if you really start to do some much bigger sort of workloads and you want to get in an environment to kind of continue your exploration, cloud is a fantastic environment for that. So when you look at cloud, there's really two things. We're working with both Microsoft and Amazon. So if you can explore Azure AC Insight, which is sort of based on HTTP 2.5. We also have a Sandbox that's available to run on Azure. Right now, the Sandbox on Azure is at 2.4, and we'll be looking at refreshing that shortly. And the other environment is around Amazon. So we have this tech preview with Amazon to get you started with some key workloads and also to help you support you in those ephemeral workloads. So if we take a closer look at the technical preview for AWS Connected Data Architecture, and we'll have a series of webinars to kind of provide more information, but really it's two workloads. It's an EDW ETL workload that's supported and a data science workload. So whether you want to do Hive or Spark, you can pick the type of cluster that you want, and when you look at them, there's two flavors, right? There's sort of the trusted, industry-beaten, stable release of the technology. So for Hive and Spark, you're probably looking at Hive 1.2.1 and Spark 1.6. And we'll also offer the sort of leading edge. So if you want to play with Hive 2 or Spark 2 and start exploring those, this is a fantastic way to kind of start looking at that. You can get more information at hortonworks.github.io/ACP AWS. So with that, I want to transition over to the demo. So when you log in, you got your IP, you log into the 888 port, you'll see this splash screen, right? And when you click on Advanced, you'll see these are the additional links. So one of the things when you do Advanced, you can hover over, and again, you'll start seeing Raj, Holger, Maria Dev, and you start seeing this additional services. So you can click on them and it'll take you to additional screens and leverage the different personas and IDs there in that environment. And if you want to click on launch the dashboard, please note that this is going to pop up something. So you want to disable your pop-up blocker, because sometimes people don't disable the pop-up blocker and say, I don't see anything. And so please make sure to disable your pop-up blocker. So when you click on it, you'll see two screens appear, right? On your right, you'll see the tutorial, right? And this is a Hello World tutorial to get you started. It's marked number 2. So number 1 is that learning the ropes tutorial. So remember that tutorial, to kind of give you the basic introduction. So if you're sort of familiar with the Sandbox or with a virtual machine environment, you can skip it, but it's probably good for you to kind of at least look it over. And then, get you to the getting started. So this getting started really has five steps, right? You want to load some data, you want to query the data, do some initial exploration, maybe transform the data, and then it actually deals with a trucking company, so that's dealing with some insurance issues, and they're ingesting some new data sources from trucks and on their fleet, and they're trying to calculate. They've had their insurance go up, so they're trying to calculate their insurance risk. So it gives you 2 approaches to calculate a risk factor. Once you've done some initial data prepping, so you can either do that with Pig or with Spark, and at the end you'll do some reporting. So once you've done the preparation, you massage the data, you've done some calculation, let me do a report. So on your left here, this is the Apache Ambari sort of dashboard, right? So you'll see that the dashboard tab is highlighted. On the left, you'll see a whole collection of services that are started. So you can click on one, and you'll see the services are started. There's some additional tabs for configuration. You probably want to see this quick links. So sometimes there's additional services that you can use, and so that's one of the key things you can do with the dashboard. But really, what you want to do, if you're not doing sort of an operational, you want to do some development. You want to leverage some Apache Ambari views. And Apache Ambari views, you'll see this 9 square on the top right-hand corner, and that right square is lists the collection of Ambari views that you can work with. So one of the first things that we want to do, well, let's kind of go through some of these views. So the files view allows you to interact with HDFS and get move data and manipulate data on the Hadoop distributed file system. There's a Hive view to interact with Apache Hive. There's a Pig view to interact with Apache Pig, similar to Storm. And lastly, there's a Tez view to bring up the Apache Zeppelin UI. If you ever want to change your user, you can always, if you're maybe dealing with a different persona that needs additional authorization, you can sign out of Maria Dev, which is the default persona, and sign into a different persona. So for example, if you wanted to add a service, so if you click on Actions, you don't see the ability to add service. That's because Maria's a developer, right? And Maria doesn't have the authorization to add a service. But Raj is our operator, right? And if you wanted to perform a task like adding a service, you would need to log into the environment with the Raj Ops ID, right? And you can sign out and sign back in. So let's kind of look at the files view, right? So I'm not going to go through the whole tutorial, but I do want to kind of give you sort of a basic introduction, right? So let's kind of expand this. Right, so we have the files view, right? We can traverse into users, and we'll see Amy and Holger and Maria and Raj as users here. We're going to log into, navigate to the Maria Dev, right? And we can create a new folder, right? So I'm going to call this folder data. So I'm going to click the add button to add this folder. I can go to the data folder, and then I could decide to upload data. So I can click on the button to upload data. So into the Hello HTTP tutorial, one of the first things that you do is you download some data. So you have this geolocation.zip. You download that file, you unzip it, and you want to look at the trucks, right? So you open that file, right? And that brings the data into HDFS. Right, so now that CSV file is on your Hadoop distributed file system. Going back to sort of Maria did, one of the other things you could do is change permission. So if you actually don't click on the folder itself, but click a little to the right of it, you'll see some additional capability come up. So you can change the permission, right, to make sure that you can write. So we'll do that in the save. Now we want to start, now we have the data in HDFS, but what is it? Right, so let's start our exploration. So bring up the high view, right? So we'll bring up the high view. There's some initial checks that happen when you bring up the high view for the first time. And so you'll see this whole collection of tabs on the top, right? To query, to save queries, to look at history, and upload data. There's some default data that comes here. There's a food mart data. There's some additional default data that you can find here. But I want to actually create a table. So, and I want to use something that I've already uploaded. So we have the option to upload from a local file, but the data is already on HDFS. So we choose this option to upload from HDFS. So the data here is in my user Maria dev/data/trucks CSV file, and so I want to click preview. So in this case, the data is already uploaded, so it's exploring the file. So in the file, it sees that here's a whole collection of columns that it's mapping from the CSV, but wait, the first row is actually picking up my column names. So that's kind of horrible. It'd be great if there's a quick way to kind of say, hey, use the first row as my header as the name for my column. And actually provide that. So what you need to do is, you'll see for this file type, there's options so you can bring in CSV, JSON, XML data fairly easily. But you want to click on this gear file. So on the gear file, there's some additional options for delimiters and escape characters. But you can also say, hey, is the first row the header? And you should see that now the first row is moved over here, so you click on close. And now your first row is being used as the names of the columns itself. So that looks pretty good. So now I'm ready to upload the data. So in the upload, what you'll see is a series of a screen that comes up that's temporarily, where there's a temporary table that's created because there's some optimization that happens because we're actually storing the data as org. And this is just sort of done transparently for you underneath the covers. The data is loaded into a temporary staging table. Then from there, it's optimized into the Apache org columnar format. And then your data, then your table is actually created. So actually, let's go back into Hive, right? And we're going to do a refresh. And we're going to go look into defaults, right? And now we see trucks, right? And so we see the various columns there that we picked up from our header, and we can click right here on the right, and it'll allow us to kind of quickly issue a query, right? So it started a query, right? It started running, it ran, and then you can look at the results. So if you look at logs, you can see logs for that. And you can see results, right? So here's the actual data in Hadoop that we've basically uploaded, started exploring in basically about 3 minutes. And from here, you can start issuing a whole bunch of other sort of query statements. As we look at the Hive view, so you mentioned these Hive tabs, there's the ability to refresh and look at the databases and tables that are in this environment. And on the right, there's a whole other series of tabs, right? So here you can look at queries, which is what we're doing. If you hover over the eye, it gives you a couple of tips. So you can use control space to do autocomplete for your SQL statements. Tells you some of the, you could highlight a SQL statement if there's a collection of them and execute just one of them. You can look at your configuration and settings. There's some visualization. So for that table that I just uploaded, I can quickly build a visualization for that. So I can look at exploring that data to say, okay, I loaded the data, but what data is in there? So I just, without actually generating anything new, I can look at, here's the type of drivers, and I can look at the type of trucks those drivers are running. So I can quickly start my exploration. There's a whole series of default visualizations that come. Also here, you can look at the explain. So if you're familiar with SQL, there's a query plan that gets generated. TES is sort of, if you use TES with your Hive statement, you can see the DAG, the query plan associated with that Hive statement. And lastly, you can look at sort of notifications. So that's a quick look at Apache Ambari views. And probably the last thing we want to look at is Zeppelin. So if you click on the Zeppelin tab, there's no demo that could go perfect without an error that sort of comes up. So if I look at my dashboard, right, so I can look at Zeppelin, take this IP, dump it in, and this will bring up my Zeppelin notebook, right? I think one of the things that happened, so I just started a new Sandbox. So this is one thing to note, that in the Learning the Ropes tutorial, it tells you to map your local host into your profile. So if you map your local host into your profile, I think then the Zeppelin notebook will come in by default. So this is your Zeppelin notebook. You can create a new node, sample node. And from here, you can start issuing SQL statements, Spark statements, and exploring your data even further. So if we go back to our PowerPoint, so that's a quick demo of the Sandbox and a quick walkthrough through the tutorial. So the tutorial gives you a very prescriptive, step-by-step process that you can follow at your own pace. So what's next? So I do want to leave a little bit of time for the questions here at the end. So here's 7 steps you might want to look at beyond this. So one is how far you yourself and your company is at a maturity level with big data. There's a big data scorecard that you want to explore. I provide the links for your environment. So whether you're working with a Sandbox or a cloud, you want to maybe explore additional tutorials. Here's where you can check out additional tutorials. Then getting help. So there's a whole Hortonworks community to look at questions and additional articles. Follow our technical blog, or if you want to, if you have further questions or want to reach out to us, you can, we'd love to hear from you guys and contact us. So other ways to kind of keep your getting started experience going. So online, we'll talk about to the forums, but if you actually want to meet with other folks that are exploring this, there's a Future of Data meetup that's happening sort of worldwide, so you can find more information at futureofdata.io. We have one here based out of Silicon Valley, which I'm one of the co-hosts. It's a live stream, so if you're not in the Silicon Valley, you can still leverage it. But you say, wait, maybe I am in India or in Australia, this is a really bad time. Don't worry about it. The replays are available, so check them out on YouTube. And lastly, I want to talk a little bit about HCC, so the Hortonworks Community Connection. So this is a Q&A environment where you can find lots of questions and answers. So first look for questions before, first look for already posted questions with answers before you post a new question. But there's 2 things, or actually 3 things that are key there. So there's the question and answers. There's a whole collection of articles. So there's a rich collection of articles that provide you tips on doing particular things, whether it's with the Sandbox or other components. And so there's some collection of repositories and code samples that are available for you. So the community is, we started at the beginning of the year, but it's really exploded. So we have over 8,000 users, 20,000+ answers posted, 30,000 technical assets, and it's a community-based environment so that you can build your reputation. So as you answer questions, post articles, you start moving up on the leaderboard, right? So now I'm going to go off, and I think we have about maybe 10-ish minutes for some questions. So here's my Twitter handle and the Hortonworks Twitter handle. So with that, folks can post questions. So are there any questions in the chat?
Yep, I can ask them for you, and maybe you can answer them.
Okay.
When I shut down the HTTP VM, do I need to shut down the processes, or just to shut down now, or even the VM console shutdown is fine? Second question: are we supposed not to run yum updates on this VM?
You really want to leverage the Hortonworks environment to do any updates to your components within that environment. Again, this is an environment for you to explore, so you're free and welcome to do so. When you look at yum, I know there's been some, if you want to do like a yum install of an additional component, there's been some feedback on the bugs found with the environment. We're looking at doing a refresh so that you'll be able to do a yum install. So the Sandbox does we listen to the community, and as we find issues or we get feedback, we do make updates to it periodically. So do look at the Sandbox page and look at the MD5 code, because as the MD5 code changes, there'll be an update to the Sandbox. There's also a command called Sandbox version, so Sandbox-version, to give you the version of your Sandbox. So you can kind of also look at that as a new version of the Sandbox will become available. So yes, you should be able to install. There's currently a bug. Look for a refresh coming soon.
Great. Next question: what is the recommended space availability?
So the Sandbox itself is about 12 gigabytes to kind of get started. Maybe you want it to. Yeah, maybe you want to do about 15. It all really depends on what you're doing, right? Because as you add data and as you start doing further processing, your space will grow, right? Remember, this is a pseudo getting started environment, right? So this is great to get you started, easy, simple way to kind of get up and running. Try some of these tutorials, so the tutorials sort of are set up for this. Some tutorials actually need additional resource. So for example, there's a Hive LAP interactive SQL tutorial. That tutorial wants the Sandbox to have at least 12 gigs of RAM and might need some additional storage because the data set's a little larger. So it really kind of depends on what you're doing with it. But for most of the tutorials, you should be able to get away with 8 gigs of RAM for your virtual machine and about 15 gigs of space for the actual image. But as you do more, you will need more space.
Next question. I'm a beginner and I tried to download Sandbox. What's the difference between VirtualBox and VM?
It's really a preference on what environment you want to deal with. Now, I run a Mac. VMware supports a Mac, but you have to actually pay for VMware Fusion to use VMware on the Mac, right? So personally, I use VirtualBox on the Mac. They both work. Sometimes there's a corporate preference for one or for the other. A lot of our tutorial development is using VirtualBox. So, again, it's up to you which one you're using. But you might consider, if you have a choice between either one of them, I might start off with VirtualBox just because the tutorials are written that way. But the experience should be the same, right? So how you launch it, what you interact with it, it's the VirtualBox or VMware. It's just the host where it works with it. But interacting with it, it'll be the same interaction.
Where do we get sample data sets to load into HDFS and do MapReduce practice?
There's actually a tutorial that can get you started with MapReduce. Although much of the, if you're just getting started, I probably would start with something like Apache Hive, right? So Apache Hive can generate either MapReduce or Tez or Spark these days. So I might start, instead of starting with MapReduce as your first thing, I'd probably start with Hive, maybe Pig or Spark. And then if at some point you want to explore the MapReduce API, which is fantastic, we do have a tutorial that you can leverage for that. As far as data sets, the different tutorials have a different collection of data sets. We have a data set that we use for many of the tutorials around the trucking IoT scenario, which you saw like me in the demos load truck data. We also sample data that's part of the sandbox called Food Mart, which is sort of a snowflake, subset of a snowflake schema to kind of do some more warehousing-like sort of activities. And many of the tutorials might ask you to download additional sample data.
Next question. Do we need hypervisor enabled? What about machines that don't have hypervisor?
To use any platform or hardware, there is a virtualization enabled on the PC or on the chip itself. So on the BIOS, you may have to enable that to use VirtualBox or VMware. That's more of a VirtualBox VMware requirement rather than a Hortonworks requirement. But to use those virtual platforms, you don't do that, and that's specified in the installation guide.
Great. Will practice on Sandbox be enough to prepare for HTTP certification? I'm a beginner, can't afford to do infrastructure, got a laptop with 8 gigs.
Okay, so if you have a laptop with 8 gigs, remember, so you need more than 8 gigs of RAM. So if you only have 8 gigs of RAM, it won't be enough. It might start or be very slow, but then you'll start seeing very odd behavior. So if you try to give it 6 gigs or 4 gigs of RAM, it's going to be problematic. So you probably want to explore the cloud, or potentially adding additional RAM into your environment. And as far as the certification, so the Sandbox and tutorials are a great way to get started. And there's 60+ tutorials, so it can keep you occupied and in a learning experience for a while. But you want to complement that with reading maybe additional books, or the Apache websites themselves, or the Hortonworks documentation. We do offer training, right? So Hortonworks University, there's some free courses that have, I think Hadoop Essentials is free, and then they have paid courses that you can explore. Many universities also have free online stuff. We also, meetups would be also a good way to kind of keep growing and learning additional sort of bleeding edge technologies. So the meetups, we try to do a mix of both new technology and some getting started.
Next question. I noticed there's a .ova file extension. What tool should I use to run this?
So you can actually use VirtualBox, or I think VMware both support sort of OVA. You just need to import that file.
Yeah, but we do specify so there's OVAs for both, correct? It's a open virtualization architecture format, right? So they are extension with OVA, but specific OVA is specifically for VMware, and one is specific for VirtualBox. Hence the MD5 hashes that we do provide to kind of distinguish the different files.
Next question. How does MapReduce work? Does it follow the same threading concept?
So MapReduce is I'm not so sure about the sort of the threading concept, but MapReduce is a distributed computing framework. And in the HTTP environment, there are multiple frameworks that you can leverage. So there's the projects and data access tools, whether it's Apache Hive, Pig, Spark. Some of them use different execution engines. So you could use MapReduce as an execution engine. You can use Apache Tez as an execution engine. You can use Apache Spark as an execution engine. And there's other technologies like Apache Apace, which use different models. So so depending on what you're trying to do, but basically MapReduce, the 30-second introduction of MapReduce, it's a divide and conquer, right? So the map is you take a computational problem where you want to perform a particular action many times, count, observe, look at particular behavior. So the map really does is it breaks it down into smaller chunks that can be distributed across the cluster. The operation gets performed, There's some sorting that happens to kind of bring the results of the map to a particular node. And then there's an aggregation that happens at the end, which is the reduce, right? And then you get the answer that you want. But MapReduce is not the only framework that's available with Apache Hadoop. Okay, so I think that's time for the questions. But we want to keep this kind of going, so feel free to post questions in the Hortonworks Community Connection. And please post your additional questions there. This webinar will be available for replay. Thank you very much for your time. Hopefully this has helped folks get started with Hadoop and the HTTP Sandbox. Look for additional blogs and webinars in the future to talk about other technologies provided by Hortonworks and how to get started. So thank you very much.